Welcome to Educational Alpha. Kaya CEO and host Bill Kelly brings you on-the-ground conversations with business leaders, educators, coaches, and industry colleagues from around the globe. In this episode, Bill chats with one of his professional mentors, Dale Favors, managing partner for Adaptive Growth Leadership. The two discuss everything from developing leaders who build diverse teams to the effect of culture and leadership on business growth. Listen in to learn more on how education comes with experience, exposure, and most importantly, access.
Welcome to the latest edition of Educational Alpha, where the investor's edge starts with informed consent. I'm your host, Bill Kelly, and today I'm joined by my new but old friend, Dale Favors. Dale, great to see you.
Hey, thanks for having me, Bill.
So, the purpose of this program, Dale, is Educational Alpha, trying to give that investor that edge, that blind spot. And when I think about Educational Alpha, it should be something that you and I jointly share together, and it should be democratized as well. And education shouldn't necessarily be an edge, but I think for the investor that chooses to educate themselves, they're going to find that they're better off than somebody that doesn't. But before we get into that, you've had a very interesting background. You've been very helpful to me on many, many different platforms, made some very important introductions. You've been a very important mentor to me as a white male, figuring out how I can make a difference in DEI. But maybe just introduce yourself a little bit and we'll take it from there.
Again, Dale Favors, pleasure to be here. I'm the managing partner of an organization called Adaptive Growth Leadership, or AGL as we refer to it. And it is a organization that is focused on leadership and professional development, training, coaching, and strategy. So we work with a number of organizations helping to develop leaders in their organization, but also helping those leaders learn how to build and cultivate diverse teams of individuals that are successful and productive. So that's mostly what we focus on. Starting that back in 2018, after leaving a career working in financial services, starting out after went to school. I'm originally from Ohio, so I'll take it back there. Originally from Ohio, went to Florida A&M for my undergrad work, stayed, got my MBA, and was offered the opportunity to join Morgan Stanley in their fixed income sales and trading group back in the early 90s. And that was the beginning of my education on not just Wall Street, but also how to navigate large organizations. And that is not an easy task, but it becomes easier as you've had more experiences. So that's when on the educational side, Bill, that's what it is. Education comes with experience, exposure, and access. And so that's what I would tell you it is. The key piece throughout my journey was having a stop at Morgan Stanley, having other stops. There was a significant stop at Bloomberg LP where I spent some time, and that really redirected my career. So having the opportunity to work at Bloomberg when it was a smaller company and watching it grow and having access to individuals like Mike Bloomberg was very instrumental in my growth as a professional and watching him lead an organization. But also, what it did was it gave me a runway to try many different things. And I was able to then leave there and go a few other places and work. And one of the key places I would say I stopped I left Bloomberg to go to a startup, and this place was called Future Trade, which is an electronic trading platform at the time in the early stages of those games in the early 2000s. And met a gentleman, Jim Kwiatkowski, who really bought into my growth as a sales leader. And him investing in me led me to understanding a lot of things that go into leadership from a standpoint of communicating up, but also communicating down, building relationships and building trust. And that led me, I ended up going a few other places in between there, but 10 years later, he contacts me to rejoin him with now he was at Thomson Reuters and leading globally a business. And I went there to help manage one of the businesses under his watch. And that again gave me some additional skills, which led me to believe that I could break out on my own and try some things. So that's kind of what led me to building the skills necessary to create what we now have as AGL. And we've been able to not only help a number of organizations think through strategically how to grow leaders, build pipeline of talent from diverse backgrounds, but also help talented individuals from diverse and underserved backgrounds understand the skill set necessary to succeed in large and small organizations, but what skills are necessary, the technical skills as well as the social skills, which are extremely important. So I thank you for allowing me to come here and share a little bit of my thoughts, but that's really what it's all about, man.
That's a great opening. And I sense a couple of avenues I can go down, but I'm going to pick on culture and leadership. And I'm not sure if you mentioned the word culture, but everything you said exuded that because culture comes from the top and the leader sets the tone. I don't know Jim at all. I only know Bloomberg from his days as a mayor. And it sounds like you had two very good role models to grow up under early on in your career where they exuded what today's leader needs to be. But I'm sure in your years at Morgan Stanley and mine at Bear Stearns and other firms, not the firms themselves necessarily, but that autocratic leader, speak when spoken to. I tell you when to jump and how high is the only question you should be asking. And I think that's the kind of leadership environment I grew up in, and maybe you did as well. And I think leadership has to change and has to evolve. And I know we've always talked about diversity, but it's not just diversity relative to race or gender. Those are clearly important. But maybe talk about some of the skill sets that a leader today has to have, things like empathy versus that would have been for the softy when you and I were coming of age in this industry.
I tell you, it's interesting to have watched corporate America evolve. And yes, I can look back at my days of joining Morgan Stanley, and there were plenty of people who gave me a shot, right? And that one shot really came from some connectivity that started with John Rogers, who's one of the greatest people to me, because without him, I would not be where I sit today. And I'll say that because I happened to get an internship with Ariel Investments and had a chance to meet with John, and he effectively turned over his Rolodex and asked me to meet several people. One of those people happened to be Bill Lewis, who was at the time back in New York, but had spent time in Chicago. And Bill was the first African American managing director at Morgan Stanley. That chance connectivity led to him introducing me to a gentleman by the name of Mike Giorgio, which Mike was the head of HR for Morgan Stanley. And he put together a group of people who interviewed me and really bought into this young man from this historically black college, not just undergrad, but MBA program, who they were going to give a shot. And that's all I needed was that one shot. And so that type of investment is what leaders today have to be more deliberate about, making that type of investment into employees who may not have all of the things that they usually may want in someone, but has the majority of them, but has the potential. And I think that that's important for leaders. I would tell you that while there, I met a lot of good people. I'll name names: Gene Flood, Vic Garber, Cliff Strain, David Grain, a lady named Eileen Sassower, who really taught me how to think on a daily basis about all the things that were going on. And I try to share that in the work that I do now, not only as a leader of adaptive growth leadership, but also as a adjunct professor at Seton Hall. So I try to share understanding how all the puzzle pieces come together, understanding what's going on from a standpoint of national economics in the US, understanding what's going on geopolitical, and then understanding what's happening on the corporate front. And all those things together really help you to design and develop an opinion. So I try to help young people develop opinions based on the data. And I think that leaders have to be more deliberate about helping young people develop their style of thinking and develop their critical thinking and strategic thinking skills necessary to become leaders down the road. And people investing in me early, and then me getting to places like Bloomberg and other places, as I talked about, that allowed me to test some of the things I thought I might know, was extremely important. So I think leaders today have to be deliberate about investing in young talent, deliberate about helping those individuals as well as others along the way in developing their leadership style, but also create a culture in which learning becomes something that everyone's doing at the organization, and learning becomes infectious because everyone wants to do it because they see the results of learning. And I think that that is really what organizations and leaders can do today: create the culture in which learning is just infectious. Learning becomes something that everyone is focused on doing and testing the things that they think they're learning about, and see if some of those things turn into gold. And I think that that's what I was allowed to test, make mistakes, grow from those mistakes, keep being encouraged by others, and then develop a leadership style that included me growing, but also me involved in helping others to grow. I think that's what leaders have to do.
I want to pull a thread out of that, Dale, networking. I think you and I first met, and I'm going to have Troy on here, Troy Prince, a good mutual friend of ours, on a platform where that was one of the topics brought up. And I do wonder and worry about this next generation where they're very tech savvy, they're tech enabled, there's an app for everything. Then along comes COVID and everything goes virtual for 3 years. And some of these folks who are college age, taking courses online, coming into the industry, everything's virtual. So they might look at you and I and saying, this networking, that's for your generation. It's not important for me. And I just roundly dismiss that because being able to conduct yourself in front of a meeting, how to speak, when to speak, how to talk to a client. And I think there's only so much of that can be done virtually. And I know I've always believed in networking. You have brought it to an art form. And I don't think it's ever going to go out of style, but maybe just putting a bold underscore on how important you feel that is. And I know you work with a lot of these HBCUs around the US, and you've been very kind to introduce us into some of those platforms, which I think there's a responsibility for organizations like ourselves to be involved there.
Yeah, so there's a lot of things there. I will talk a little bit about the HBCUs and the importance of having those as part of the history of the United States. But let's go back a little bit and talk about why young people should be engaged. And I know, look, we were moving in the direction of things being more virtual anyways, just COVID helped to speed that process up. It was a good and a bad thing. It allowed us from a business community to realize that many things could be done and didn't have to be done meeting in person or meeting in the or everyone being in the office. That was just a style that was what we knew. That was totally disrupted, and everything was let out the box like, hey, we don't actually have to be in the office to get things done. So productivity may not be impacted, but connectivity is impacted. Productivity not impacted, connectivity totally impacted, and we don't see that piece of it until later. So that will show up later, 4 or 5 years from now, in which how will our leaders be connected to everyone in the organization? How will those leaders communicate with others? Because it becomes very important. And I'll say this: I've talked to some young people, or someone say, "Hey, can you talk to this person? Talk to that person?" Absolutely, give them my information. And every young person is more apt to text me, introduce themselves, versus pick up the phone, call me, introduce themselves, and begin a conversation. And the reason for that is, yes, okay, they maybe they feel, well, I don't know the person yet. Maybe texting is okay. So texting has become the fashionable way to maybe connect, or if the person chooses to not communicate back, it's okay. I'm not sure what it is, but picking up the phone and making a phone call to someone that you don't know, cold calling, I guess it would be, or warm calling, is an art form. It forces you to have to communicate verbally. It forces you to have to put your thoughts together in a way in which you have to say, hey, hello, I'm so and so. Someone, this individual asked me to contact you. Here's what I'm looking for from you. Can you assist me? Very simple, but people would rather, it's almost like, I don't want to be disappointed or I don't want to be turned down. So let me just send this message and see what happens. And I'm usually the person that says, why don't you pick up the phone and call me at 15 minutes, in an hour, and whenever? And they're usually surprised. Wow, you actually asked me to call you. And I'm saying that is how you begin a conversation. That is how you should begin a relationship, because this is not a transaction. It's a relationship. You should want that. And so I'm encouraging them to begin the process of building that network. And I would tell you that networking and building those relationships have meant a lot to who I am today and what I'm able to do as a professional today. And many of those reasons are because I made the phone call. I stay in touch. I periodically make phone calls. I try to call someone that I haven't talked to. I try to at least, I'll choose 3 people that I haven't spoken to in a while and reach out and just say hello every day. I try to do that. And I think that that's important, and that is where we need to get young people and professionals doing this. Now, and I'll add to this, the working remotely, working hybrid has been very beneficial to everyone. And I would say even older seasoned professionals have benefited from that.
Yeah, I agree with all that. And credit to you, Dale, that not only do you encourage people to make those phone calls, you take those phone calls as well, as do I try to do it, maybe not nearly as well as you, but I get a lot of cold outreach from a young student on LinkedIn. Don't know him. I may not even know the university. Could you give us an hour to come in and guest lecture our students? I make those types of calls priorities. And I think that people should be more like Dale. I try to be that we have a responsibility to take those calls to and pay it back to this next generation. So thank you for that. This is last question and probably not enough time to answer it, Dale, but I just want to get your assessment of the current state of play of diversity in our industry, not as a fashion statement at all. It's, I think, critical. And if I think about diversification, which is what we try to do at Kaya, it begins with a diversity of inputs in a diversity of thought process in a diverse team. And if you have an investment team made up of individuals from the same background, same neighborhood, same upbringing, same sense of risk reward, it's not going to be necessarily the best and most sustainable process. So I view this as a must have in terms of better investment decisions. And on top of that, we're seeing more and more diversity about people sitting on the other side of the table, the pension consultants, the asset owners, the asset allocators. We still have a lot of work to do here. So maybe both your view of the current state of play and then maybe a takeaway about what we can do to continue to move this in the right direction.
Well, I'm going to answer both of those, and I'm going to add back in what I said earlier about the HBCU. So I would say that what we've realized is diversity has probably cost us more money by not creating a more diverse community within our corporate offices than it has not. It's really cost us, some component of money. I believe there's a study done. McKinsey may have done, I think, did a study, and it was very, very expansive. But what we really understand that if we're a truly diverse a country that is made up of a lot of different people, the melting pot, as we always like to consider ourselves to be, we should be inclusive of not just being able to live in the same communities, but being able to work in the same offices, share things together, become dear friends of each other, and be compensated fairly and equally, whether you're a person of color or a woman. In doing that, that does not mean, and I always listen to this and I kind of cringe at times where people say, well, they don't need any more white males. And I'm like, we don't want to say that because then you're telling someone that they're not needed. I don't think that's true. I think that what we're saying is if we can all play in the same sandbox together, there's always room for more. And what may happen is by adding more, one of those other people that you've added or someone who may have already been there may come up with an idea to expand that sandbox so that there's even more room for everyone. And someone else may not have thought about that before. So that's what we're really trying to do is if you bring in a broader group of people coming from diverse backgrounds and diverse thoughts, then maybe they find a way to create a more expansive opportunity for everyone to benefit from. So I think this is going to benefit diversity is going to benefit everyone, white male included. And so I don't want to say I always cringe when someone says that about displacing the white male. This is not about displacement. This is about expansion. And if we look at it that way, I think there's benefits for all of us in that. In doing such, I think that there's a realization there's a need for people from diverse backgrounds and what it could potentially benefit the organization, especially as those companies look to expand and find new customers and reach new markets. Maybe there's something to that. Great thing is there's been these historically black colleges that have existed in this country for over 100 years. And this talent has been cultivated at these universities, these colleges and universities, and have just as much talent as anyone else. The challenge is they weren't always offered the opportunities to be in certain spaces. That is changing. That is awesome to watch. But let's not also forget there's people of color at majority institutions as well that we should consider because we don't want our people of color who are at those schools to be left out either. We can just be more inclusive of those HBCUs, which are extremely important to get those students because I think the talent speaks for itself, right? You can go from people in senior government offices to individuals who have run large organizations to military strategists and five-star generals, whatever it is, we've done it. from HBCUs, but I say people of color are everywhere, and what we bring to the table is this ability to navigate different communities and bounce back and forth between those communities and still be successful. And I think that that's what being able to do that is what diversity is all about, and bringing that thought process is what's going to help all companies benefit from that. And I think it's going to be a win-win if once everyone embraces it in that format.
Well, great observations, Dale. Thank you for your time today, your friendship, your leadership, and all that you do. I very much appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Bill.
Please join us on the next segment of Educational Alpha as we look to always put the investor first through transparency, education, and informed consent.